Sharpen your sword and stretch out your fingers for some page flipping because today we're taking a look at 5 Leagues from the Borderlands. Hey there, Philip here from Manning the Fort. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you probably know that I'm a big fan of solo-friendly wargames. In particular, I've really enjoyed Five Parsecs From Home, written by Ivan Sorensen and published by Modifius Entertainment. Now I want to take a closer look at that game's fantasy counterpart, 5 Leagues from the Borderlands. As I go forward, I'm inevitably going to reference 5 Parsecs From Home as a comparison point to 5 Leagues, but I'll also try to explain things in a way that folks who are unfamiliar with either game can understand. If sci-fi appeals to you more than fantasy, there is a link to my 5 Parsecs playlist in the description. So, what is 5 Leagues from the Borderlands? To put it briefly, it's a solo and co-op miniature skirmish game with quite a few tabletop RPG elements baked in. As I've played more solo games, especially narrative ones, I realize that one of the challenges that writers must overcome is keeping an element of surprise within a system where there's no game master or AI running things behind the screen. Some games, like Space Station Zero, have done this with a long list of interconnected outcomes listed in the back of the book, kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure novel for those of you old enough to remember those. Most of the others rely on some means of randomizing game mechanics, story elements, or both. 5 Leagues, much like 5 Parsecs, uses a lot of random tables to determine how the game unfolds. I do not recommend a drinking game involving how often I mention rolling on a table, unless maybe you're drinking water. Though, even then, it is possible to hurt yourself drinking too much water, so maybe just give it a miss entirely. After the typical What is a Wargame section, the book starts with warband creation. As a quick side note here, I always like it when games do this. Knowing who my guys are from the jump tends to help me get invested in learning the game they're going to be part of. In 5 Leagues from the Borderlands, a typical campaign is going to start with 6 warband members. 4 of those are heroes who progress and gain new abilities in sort of an RPG-light fashion. One of those heroes can be a mystic. The mystic feels a lot like a throwback to the old days of D&D where there wasn't a distinction between wizards, sorcerers, clerics, etc. There were simply magic users. The spells available to the mystic cover buffing your warband, debuffing the enemy, healing, and direct damage. 5 Parsecs From Home did eventually add psionics in an expansion, but it wasn't present in the base rules, so having this option baked into 5 Leagues is nice. The other 2 warband members you create are followers, who are a bit weaker to begin with. You can start with more characters than this if you want, and there are rules to adjust how the game runs if you decide to do so, but 6 is considered the default. When making your warband, you can either roll randomly for everything, or start with some miniatures you like to at least determine the basics. When I made my 5 Parsecs crew, I rolled everything randomly. In this case, however, I decided to start with some minis fresh from the printer. For my heroes, I'm using models from Flesh of Gods, which has recently become one of my favorite STL subscriptions. The book tells you that you can either roll randomly for everything about your heroes, including their species, or you can choose. Aside from humans, 5 Leagues doesn't directly reference any of the typical fantasy origins. At first, I thought this might be challenging to find appropriate minis for, then I remembered one of the beautiful things about solo gaming. The only one who has to be happy with the mini is me. As I describe each of the races available, I'll also discuss what mini I use to represent it where applicable. The Feyblood are descended from the Iceheart Court, fairies and elves. They have a couple of nifty magical abilities, but lose the ability to use luck, which can be a vital resource when it comes to keeping injured characters alive. Obvious choices for minis include elves, but I think you could just as easily substitute any humanoid with a touch of magical ancestry. In terms of D&D, things like Genasi, Tieflings, and Aasimar come to mind. In my case, I chose the Feyblood origin to represent my Dragonborn Mystic. Dusklings are fierce warriors who distrust magic, hate undead, and get some spiffy bonuses when charging into melee. I've seen some folks compare them to dwarves, which does make sense, but I also got some distinctly orky vibes from them. In fact, I'm using an orc miniature to represent the Duskling in my warband, Loktar Ogar. The Preen are an interesting case. In the description given in the book, they're temperamental bird people. They get bonuses to their speed and go rushing at the enemy under certain circumstances. If you have a lot of D&D minis, something like an Aarakocra or a Kenku might work, but since the Preen can't actually fly according to game rules, anything that works as a slightly built but angry mini can work here. I could even see using some elves or tieflings here too. And okay, so I was wrong. There is another very recognizable fantasy race in here, the halfling. They're short, good at attacking from range, but not as strong as the bigger folk. If you don't have any halfling models lying around, though, there's no reason you couldn't substitute a goblin. I thought about bringing a one-page rules rat man to proxy for one, and might do so down the road. Finally, we have the feral. These are meant to represent people who, by whatever magical means, have become a sort of human-animal hybrid. There are lots of variations on this theme in miniatures, from cat people to gnolls, but this is another place where I think something like an orc could work nicely. Generally, they're meant to be fairly quick, good at scouting, and awkward in polite company. After you've rolled for or selected your hero's origins, you roll on their background tables. For most origins, you don't get a choice for the tables you roll on. Humans have a few different options, and mystics also have their unique set of tables that you roll on regardless of what origin the mystic is. These rolls help flesh out the hero a bit, potentially giving them stat boosts, skills, experience points, gear, or gold. This part of the process is very similar to what you get in 5 Parsecs From Home. One thing that is significantly different from 5 Parsecs is the concept of the avatar. As the name suggests, the avatar is one of your heroes who represents you on the battlefield. As a result, they get some extra bonuses. If they die, however, you don't get to designate a new avatar unless you start a whole new campaign. This adds a slightly more first-person element than 5 Parsecs, though I find it something I tend to do anyway. The captain of my 5 Parsecs crew is kind of my default avatar, but doesn't get any associated bonuses. So it is nice that 5 Leagues has something built in to give a boost for the sort of thing I like to do anyway. Once all the heroes have been rolled up, you move on to followers, who make up the final 2 members of a standard 6-member warband. Followers have more limited gear and are generally less capable than heroes, though if they survive long enough, they can possibly become heroes in their own right. Also, beginning followers are nominally human, but I would encourage not letting that limit your model selection. I did pick one human for my Quiet Forester follower, another one-page rules mini, but I chose a tiefling for my roving traveler. Also, while the followers do have titles, there's no mechanical impact on gameplay, so there's not really any harm in just choosing which ones best fit the minis you want to use. If you have a large collection, it could be fun to roll randomly and try to wrap your head around whatever weird combinations come up. That brings me to another point that's going to be significant throughout the remainder of the discussion of 5 Leagues from the Borderlands. While there are some narrative points that come up in the various random rolls, there is definitely an expectation that you mentally fill in the gaps if you want it to be a coherent story. You're perfectly free to just pay attention to the mechanical results of the rolls, like skipping text quest in a video game, but I find the game's a lot richer if you do at least have a generally coherent idea of the narrative. Since the game involves quite a bit of bookkeeping, it's easy to look back on notes after a campaign turn or two and come up with an idea of what that period of time might have looked like from the warband's perspective. Where that sort of thinking really starts to get emphasized is in creating the region where your campaign takes place. Unlike in 5 Parsecs, where you're hopping from planet to planet, in this game your campaign takes place in a single region. There are a few settlements, a lot of wilderness, and quite a few unexplored places. In fantasy gaming, this is what often gets called a points of light setting, where a few bastions of civilization offer protection from a dangerous, largely unexplored world. This trope is almost always a sort of fantasy post-apocalypse, and frankly I love it, but that's a discussion for another video. In 5 Leagues from the Borderlands, you're told to make a map of the region where you'll be playing. This doesn't have to be elaborate. It could just be dots on a piece of paper, but I found that creating a map and naming the areas is really where the immersion started. If you're not great at drawing, and I certainly am not, there are quite a few options out there for you. Free ones include online tools like Incarnate, with a K, and Asgar's Fantasy Map Generator. There will be links to those below as well. There are quite a few others, so if you have one you prefer that I didn't mention, feel free to let me know in the comments. There's also software out there that can be very affordable if you catch it at the right time. Tools like Campaign Cartographer and Wonderdraft pop up on Humble Bundle from time to time and are well worth the money when you can find them there, especially if you would get use out of them for other fantasy games that use maps like D&D or Pathfinder. I used Wonderdraft for my map. In retrospect, I probably made the hexes too small, but this whole thing took me maybe 20 minutes to set up, and I can go back in and add things as the campaign progresses. There are also a ton of pre-made maps out there. I have a lot of old D&D modules, both in hard copy and through things like D&D Beyond and Drive-Thru-RPG. It's totally fine to just port one of those maps over and use it for your 5 Leagues game. I guess what I'm really driving at here is not to let the idea of needing a map be a hindrance to procuring one, since it's really easy and does help make things more fun. The next section of the book deals with the actual mechanics of on-table gameplay, but I want to skip that for a minute to talk about the structure of the campaign itself and the various ways you can find yourself in a tabletop battle. This is another one of the areas where 5 Leagues differs from 5 Parsecs. In the latter, you're fighting basically every campaign turn. In 5 Leagues, though, there will almost certainly be times when your warband doesn't fight a battle at all, or occasionally fights too. In fact, if you have injured characters, it's often best to try not to fight. Many, if not most of those battles, will be against the 3 threats with a capital T that you designate at the beginning of the campaign. The threats are themed groups of enemies that are, well, threatening the region in some way. You choose 2 threats from within and 1 threat from without, and assign them each a threat value, representing the danger they pose at any given time. I like the ability to set the theme for the baddies you're going to encounter, since it can make things easier on folks whose miniature collection may be more limited. That said, it's a solo and co-op game, so feel free to proxy to your heart's content. For internal threats, we start with the Ruin Within. This mostly includes your bandits, rogues, and other criminal elements happy to watch others suffer so long as they get to line their pockets. This is great if you had a lot of generic humanoid fantasy minis, either from other wargames or RPGs. Then there are the Whispers from Beyond. This is a group that includes both the undead and cultists worshipping dark powers that create undead. This is one of the options I picked for my own campaign, since I have a fair number of these minis lying around, and who doesn't love zombies and skeletons? Next is the other internal threat I chose, the Gnawing Horde. These are described as cursed animal people in the book, so I printed up some beastmen and gnolls to represent them, but I have seen other folks use kobolds and goblins to represent them with 0 issues. The Iceheart Court include the Fae, elves, dryads, and the like. The first thing that came to mind for me when it comes to minis is anyone who owns a Warhammer Fantasy or Age of Sigmar elf army is going to have no problem representing these on the table. Now, after you select the threats from within, it's time to pick a threat from without. This is a force that's looking to invade the region for whatever reason. I'm not 100% sure what led Ivan Sorensen to delineate the groups the way he did, and I've yet to see any reason that you couldn't just pick any 3 and say one of them is the invading force, but I might be wrong about that. The external threats to the region begin with the Duskling warbands. It's the description of the Dusklings in this section that really gave me the vibes of orcs in addition to dwarves, but both fit the bill perfectly well. I could also see using a broader selection of goblinoids, like bugbears and hobgoblins, to represent them if you wanted to. You're basically looking for a group of fierce warriors with a strong ritual tradition who hate magic and want to take everything over. Next up are the Oldest Kin. These are time-lost lizard men in the book. Frankly, I was tempted to pick these as my threat, since I have always liked the Mesoamerican look that a lot of lizardmen minis in various ranges have, but it would have meant a lot of printing. Maybe next time. In addition to humanoid lizard warriors, the Oldest Kin run around with various beasts, so if you have something like a Warhammer Dark Elf army, you might be able to make them fit the bill fairly well. The Curse of War is the threat that I very well might have chosen if I didn't already have undead incorporated with Whispers from Beyond. This threat represents the unending cycle of warfare and how it grinds down those caught in the meat grinder. Here, you get a lot of deserters, abandoned soldiers, ghouls, and cultists who have come to worship war and the death it brings. I could see a lot of Warhammer Chaos Mortals minis working really well here. Finally, there is the Faceless Kingdom. This is a highly organized military force that gets its name from the fact that its soldiers typically wear helmets that obscure their faces. This gives a lot of options for miniatures, but looking at my own collection, my first thought was to use Stormcast Eternals. The various groups you can encounter from this threat do also tend to have animal-themed names, so that also could open up possibilities for diversifying the minis you use. After you have your warband, your map, and your threats established, it's time to play, but not quite time to get minis on the table. As with its sci-fi counterpart, 5 Leagues from the Borderlands involves a fair bit of pre-work and rolling to determine who, what, when, where, and why you're fighting. I'm not going to get super deep into the actual mechanics of how a lot of this works. My goal is to provide a general overview of how the campaign flows. Now, when the campaign begins, your warband has just entered the region you created. For the rest of the campaign, you'll roll on tables that dictate how much gold you need to pay to keep your people fed and happy, what's going on in the local area, what rare items are available to purchase, etc. For the first turn, though, you start off by deciding where you want to go. The book says most people will start by heading to a settlement, and that's what I did, but there really isn't anything stopping you from immediately heading off for an unexplored location or to take the fight to one of the threats you established. Most of the time, whenever the warband wants to travel to another area of the map, you have to roll to see what happens. The results range from absolutely nothing to something good, or potentially getting ambushed on the side of the road, which leads to an additional battle. While there are turns in which you don't fight at all, it is entirely possible to fight more than one tabletop battle in a single campaign turn. As the campaign progresses, your primary goal is to reduce the level of danger represented by each of the threats you've chosen. This usually happens through the expenditure of adventure points, which are a sort of currency that you acquire by winning battles or achieving other objectives. It's not all just about driving off the threats, however. There are also quests, monster layers, and delves that can be explored. Delves are essentially traditional dungeons. My first couple of campaign turns were spent exploring a delve, and it felt satisfyingly like some of the dungeon crawlers that I played growing up. While you're not going to necessarily make progress on the main goal of the campaign by exploring a delve, things like that and monster layers can be a good way to acquire new gear and gold. Speaking of gold, I found it to be a very limiting factor early in the campaign. I'm only about half a dozen turns into my game, but even the upkeep I have to pay every turn eats into my warband's finances enough that I feel heavily incentivized to mitigate it. Fortunately, you can do that. After the first campaign turn, you get the choice of various campaign activities, which vary depending on whether the band is in a settlement or camped out in the wilderness. In either case, one of those options is always to reduce their upkeep cost to 0 for the turn, and I highly recommend doing so, especially early on. I also acquired some rations in my first delve exploration. Those also do a lot to reduce upkeep cost. It was only after I got them that I was able to start buying more gear for my warband. Over time, if you're winning battles against the various threats, you can eventually reduce them to 0. When that happens to all 3, you've won the campaign. The book does offer other options like starting over again in a new region, and there is an expansion called The Ancient Land of Dust that presents some new options. But with all the variability present in the base rules, I would just start over with new threats, new heroes, new everything, and play a completely different game all over again. Now let's talk a little bit about the actual tabletop battles. When you decide to go into battle, or when it's forced upon you, there are tables that dictate what the warband will be fighting against. Each of these threats has its own table. There are also tables for the monsters in delves, monster layers, and whatever you might encounter along the road. Each of these allows you to roll D100 to determine what you'll be facing, but the book also offers the option to simply work your way down the table each time you face the same type of enemy. This is the option I went with, and I'm really happy with that choice. In general, the bad guys get nastier the further down the table you go, so a warband that rolls high on any of them for their first battle might be in for a bad time. Progressing down the tables also provides some extra lead time to get the appropriate minis together or decide what you want to use as proxies. The actual battles are fought on boards between 24 by 24 inches and 36 by 36 inches. As someone with limited space to play at home, I always appreciate games that can utilize small play areas. If I'm pressed for time but still want to get a game in, I can cut down prep time significantly by using things like the Big Books of Battle Mats by Loke. With these, you lay down 2 books next to each other and instantly have a 24 by 24 play area. The combat mechanics of 5 Leagues are very similar to those of 5 Parsecs. Everything is resolved by d6s. Ranged attacks have a fixed difficulty based on how close the shooter is and whether the target is in cover. Melee attacks are opposed rolls that can be modified by various factors, most commonly the combat skill of the combatants and the presence of allies of either side. One area where I think 5 Leagues has made a significant improvement is in melee combat resolution. In 5 Parsecs, there is one exchange, and that's it. Given that it's a sci-fi game with lasers, plasma guns, and grenade launchers, it's not too surprising that close combat gets a little bit less attention. In 5 Leagues, however, each combat is a series of 3 opposed exchanges with the opportunity for a skilled defender to potentially turn the tables on the attacker. That can happen in Parsecs too, but it feels a lot less abrupt in this version, if that makes sense. All in all, the mechanics are simple and flow well. Even my first battle took less than half an hour. Granted, I'm coming in with a decent knowledge of the system thanks to 5 Parsecs From Home, but I doubt a newcomer to the mechanics would need too much longer to learn it. This is another area where I'm not going to get too far into the nuts and bolts, but I will give a few pieces of advice for new players based on my experience as well as what I've seen in battle reports others have made. First, combat is deadly. This is also true in 5 Parsecs, but the idea of a death spiral feels even more pronounced in this version. The book comes right out and says that it's a bad idea for models to wander off alone. Traveling in groups on the tabletop gives a significant mechanical advantage in combat. Second, while melee combat gets more focused than it did in 5 Parsecs, ranged weapons are still very useful. There's a reason that your warband is limited to only starting with 2 of them. That said, most of them are subject to the limited ammunition rule. That means if a character with a ranged weapon rolls a 1 to hit anytime except on their first shot, they're now out of ammo. In a lot of reviews and playthroughs I've seen, folks are not huge fans of this. For my part, I made sure my Mystic had access to the Darts spell, which lets you give more ammo to a character who has run out. Another way to mitigate the limited ammunition rule is with slings. While they are short-ranged and not good at getting through armor, the rules assume that there is always something lying around suitable to load into a sling. Once my warband's financial situation stabilized somewhat, the first thing I did was buy some for characters who did not already have ranged weapons. Finally, I want to emphasize again that whatever descriptions of heroes or bad guys in the book may say, this is a solo and co-op game, meaning the only person you have to satisfy with proxies is yourself and maybe your friends. I printed off a lot of minis to cover various options for both this and Rangers of Shadow Deep, but I realize that's not an option for everyone. Buying the quote-unquote right models for all of the things in the book would get expensive fast. I thought about putting a section here talking about various less expensive options, but then I looked at my word count and realized that this is already going to be one of the longest reviews I've written so far. As a result, that idea is going into the queue for later. If you like the additional depth of the review, or want even more depth, feel free to let me know. If you prefer it when I keep things to about 10 or 15 minutes, let me know that too. If you found this video helpful or informative, I would appreciate it if you gave it a like and subscribe to the channel. If you have ideas for future videos or want to ask me questions, you can leave a comment or shoot an email to manningthefortminis@gmail.com. If you want to help me out financially, I do have memberships turned on for the channel as well as super thanks, or you can use my referral link below to buy your paint from Monument Hobbies. I also have a discount code you can use when you shop there. And in case you missed it, I did disable my Patreon for the time being, as I'm still figuring out what a sustainable production schedule will look like going forward. If you want to see the video covering the most recent round of solo games I have my eye on in 2024, that should be on screen now. Until next time, may your generations be procedural, and thanks for watching.